Hi, welcome back to Joe Blogs, and as you can see I'm down at the beach again and it's an absolute scorcher today. Let me just show you around. There's not many people here at the moment because it's quite early in the morning, but I'm sure it will get busier later because it's forecast to be over 100 degrees here. And the reason I wanted to post this video is to talk about what's happening in the Chinese economy, because there's been two really interesting developments over the last few days. Firstly, the Chinese central bank has cut the key lending rate in China. And secondly, China has announced that it's now going to start increasing the retirement age. Now, the cutting of the interest rates is a really interesting one because China has been struggling over the past 12 to 18 months with deflation. So we've been talking on the channel over the last couple of years about inflation being a major problem in most economies. And in most economies, the target rate of inflation is around 2%. And we've seen rates in double digits in some economies. And that's led to an increase in interest rates because when you increase interest rates, it makes borrowing more expensive. Therefore, it deters people and companies from taking on more debt. They tend to spend less and therefore demand goes down, and that then leads to a reduction in prices. But in China, they've got the opposite problem. They don't have enough inflation. And you might be sitting there thinking, well, that sounds crazy. Who wants lots of inflation? Because that's obviously going to be a problem. But if you think about it from a company point of view, inflation is necessary because if you're a company, you want to factor in increases in all of your costs. You want to pay your people more, increase their wages, and you'll probably have an increase in raw material costs. And for China, they buy a lot of their raw materials overseas. So they're buying large quantities from places like Australia and the USA and various other countries. And what we've seen over the last couple of years is that those raw material prices have been going up by 3 or 4 or 5 or even 10% in some situations. So that's increasing the input costs for China. They've also got a workforce that wants constantly increasing wages. You always want to give your workforce a 1 or 2% increase just to keep everybody happy. Nobody likes being paid exactly the same amount for the whole rest of their lives. Everybody is ambitious. They want to be paid more. So companies have a lot of pressures in terms of all of their costs. So what they need is their final prices, their factory gate prices, to be increasing. But if you've been following the channel, you'll know that in every single one of the last 12 months, and actually more than 12 months, we've seen a reduction in factory gate prices, what's called the producer price index. So there's a lot of pressure on Chinese companies right now. And as a result of all of those factors, the Chinese central bank has now announced that it's cutting the key lending rate by 10 basis points. Now that might not sound like a major reduction, but lending rates are already quite low in China. And what this tells us is that the Chinese authorities are looking to stimulate their economy. And this is really interesting because whenever I post a video on China saying that China's in difficulty, that there are major problems, I get lots of comments below from people saying, what are you talking about? China's doing really well. It's forecast to grow at 5% GDP in 2024. And that is the forecast level for China for this year. However, there are fundamental problems going on in China right now. And the fact that they've had falling factory gate prices in every single one of the last 12 months means that companies in China are making less profit. Because if your prices are constantly falling on the shelves, but all of your costs are going up, that means that your profit is being squeezed, and potentially we've got a situation in China now where around 40% of all of the companies are actually posting losses. And these are just the standard manufacturing companies that I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the real estate sector, but obviously the real estate sector is also on its knees. If you've been following the channel, you'll know that over the last 2 years, the property market has collapsed in China. We've got falling volumes of sales and we've also got falling prices. And that's an absolute nightmare from a developer's point of view. And they're also struggling to be able to access enough capital to finish off all of the apartments that they started building 2 or 3 years ago. And many of those apartments, around 1.6 million, have been pre-sold. So they've actually been paid for them in advance and they haven't yet delivered them. So there are a whole host of problems going on in the Chinese economy right now. But one of the biggest picture issues that's affecting China in the long term is what's happening with the population. China has a population of 1.4 billion, and up until recently, it was the largest country in the world. It's recently been overtaken by India. And China has a real issue because it's got an aging population. So its birth rate is declining and people are living longer. In 1960, the life expectancy in China was only 44 years. However, today it's 78. And when you look at the gender split, men are living until 75 years and women are living till 81. And that's a major problem because China has one of the lowest retirement ages in the world. It's 60 for men, which is 6 or 7 years lower than it is in most developed countries. And for women, it's 55 if you work in the white-collar industry, so basically if you've got an office job that isn't manual labour, and it's only 50 if you work in a factory. And when you look at the economics of that, if you're retiring at 50 and you're living until 81, the state has to support you for 31 years. And what we've got is a real problem in terms of the ratio between people who are working and people who are retired. So basically the economics of pensions is that you pay tax and you probably make a contribution as part of your tax when you're working towards a pension pot. And that pension pot is then paid out to all of the people who've retired. Now in China, 10 years ago, there were 10 workers for every single person that was retired. And that was seen as being a good ratio. Today, only 10 years later, the ratio is 5 to 1. So there's 5 people working for every person that's retired. Now that's forecast to increase to 4 to 1 by 2030. And by 2050, it's expected that there will only be 2 workers for every single person that's retired. And that is completely unsustainable. That is not going to work. The economics of that are impossible. You'd have to be taxing people at 80 or 90 or even 95% to make those numbers work. So obviously China needs to do something about this. So they have now announced that they're increasing the retirement age. Now this increase won't actually kick in for 5 years, and it's going to be staged and it's going to be voluntary in the first place. So basically people at the moment are forced to retire either at 60 for men or 55 or 50 for women. That's going to be optional in the future, so you'll be able to continue working if you want to. And China really needs to get up to speed with what's happening in the rest of the world. We've got a retirement age of 67 in most developed countries, and it's now equal in terms of men and women. And obviously, if women are living longer, then they need to be retiring potentially even later than men if you're going to look at the economics being balanced out entirely. So what we're seeing in China right now is the start of a stimulus package that's being introduced by the authorities to try to kickstart the economy, because in the second quarter of 2024, it only achieved growth of 4.7%. Now the target for the full year of 2024 is 5%. So in order to hit that target, it needs to see more growth in the second half of the year. And unless it introduces more stimulus measures, that's pretty unlikely. So China is likely to continue with these stimulus measures over the course of the next 3 to 5 months to try to get things back on track. And if it doesn't, then what we will see is China failing to hit that 5% target. That will mean that the economy is slowing down. That will mean a potential sort of recession in China. It won't officially be a recession because it's measured by the movements in GDP. And obviously, China is a growing economy. So we won't see any falls in GDP, but we may well see GDP coming in significantly less than 5%. If that happens, we've got a serious problem in China. And unfortunately, that will have an impact on the rest of the world because China is the second largest economy by some way. But the other thing that we talked about in today's video is the fact that the demographics in China are causing it major problems in the future. When you look at the shape of the population pyramid, it's very top heavy. It's got an aging population, people are living longer, and they are retired for a very long time at the moment. Currently, they're retired for around 30 years, and the state is funding all of that. And when you've got falling birth rates and a reduction in the death rate, what that means is more and more pressure on the Chinese authorities to find more capital to pay all of the pensioners. So the best way of solving that problem is to increase the retirement age. Now, what we've seen in other countries when there's been an increase in the retirement age is that it generally causes unhappiness amongst the population. If you're somebody in China who's approaching the age of 50 or 55 or 60, then you're thinking about your retirement. You're thinking of happy days, not having to work anymore, lying back and enjoying things. If the government then says, actually, we've changed the rules and we're going to push the retirement age out by 5 or 10 years, obviously you're not going to be very happy about that. And we have seen recently in France, when they talked about moving the retirement age, there were actually riots on the streets and people are still very unhappy about the situation. So it will be interesting to see how the Chinese population reacts, whether or not we see any protests, any discontent amongst the population. It'll be interesting whether or not we get that. Let's have a look and I'll keep you posted. So hopefully you've enjoyed my final video down here on the beach. I've enjoyed being here. It's been fun. It's been a different sort of video making. I've had to do a lot of prep in advance and then try to remember some of the facts and figures and really just give you a bit more fun. I think it's nice to actually hear the sea. What I'm going to do now is just finish off by a quick walk over to the sea. I'll have a quick paddle. I think it's a bit early, but it's still really hot. It is lovely down here. I think, as I've said in other videos, it is important to get out and about and actually not just do work all the time. What I've tried to do here is a combination of a little bit of work, not too much. It's been early in the morning, hasn't been too taxing, hasn't taken me that long, and a little bit of relaxation. And the relaxation, I think, is really important. If you haven't had a holiday, if you haven't had a break for a long time, I would definitely recommend it. It's something that you need really to reset everything, to give you that peace of mind, and to think up some new ideas, because when you're constantly working, it's difficult to be creative. But when you take a bit of time out and sit back and relax, that's when things all start to fall into place and you can start seeing how your life works out and what you should be doing in the future. So I'll sign off now with the sea right behind me. Hopefully you've enjoyed these outdoor videos. I think I'm going to continue this concept when I do get home. Obviously not at the beach because I don't live at the beach, but I'll find somewhere I think that's more relaxing and fun to be able to share things with you. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's video and I'll see you again soon. And here's something to put a smile on your face. Hi, I've got some really exciting news for you. I've decided to give away another one of my sculptures. And this time it's this piece, which is called Windswept Clock. And the reason that it's called Windswept Clock is because it's got a fully functioning clock built into it. Now this is a metal sculpture by the British artist Paul Margetts. He actually created the previous piece that I gave away, which was called Stiltman. I've got a number of his other pieces, and this is made of metal. It's really quite heavy, would look fantastic in anybody's place. And before we get into the details of how you could win this, I thought you might be interested in hearing about who won the previous versions. So the first one of these prizes that I gave away was the Little Red Balloon Dog, which was a balloon dog based on the Jeff Koons sculpture. And those sculptures go for tens of millions of dollars. And that was won by Craig in Australia. So let's have a look at the short video that Craig made when he received the Little Red Balloon Dog.
That looks like good news. It looks like the Chinese economy is back on track. However, in today's video...
Now the second prize that I gave away was Stiltman. And you may remember that the winner was a guy called Lars from the Netherlands. And I couldn't actually get hold of him. And I had to post a video saying, where is Lars? We put out an emergency call to see whether or not he could contact us. Eventually he did. And he's created a fantastic video of when Stiltman arrived in the Netherlands. So if you want to become the third ever winner and have this adorning your home, then you need to buy a ticket in the prize draw, which are priced at just £1 each, which is around $1.30. And that's being organised by an independent company, completely above board. I'm not involved in drawing the winner. It will be completely at random. And I'll post this anywhere in the world. There is a slim possibility that you may need to pay some import duty, but I don't think Craig or Lars did, so you'll probably get away with it. So if you're interested in winning this and having it in your place, then buy a ticket in the draw rather than buying me a coffee or sending me a YouTube super thanks, because you'll be supporting the channel and also giving you a chance to win this fantastic piece. So buy a ticket and good luck.